Good morning, everybody, and welcome. We're going to get started here right away. Just going to go live on YouTube as well. Big crowd today. Okay, I'm just going to let this boot up. 418 registered. I'm sure we're going to hit about 200 in the live crowd today. Figure out the weather. No small feat. We got the experts on the line, so just 1 second here. Perfect. That's all working. All right, we're ready to roll. Well, in the next 90 minutes, one of the most respected agricultural meteorologists in the world is going to walk you through exactly what the 2026 prairie growing season is shaping up to look like. No pressure, Drew. And what you can actually do about it. Action items, not just the weather, what are you going to do about it? This is what the weather knows, and it starts now. So thanks so much for joining us. If you're catching this on YouTube, hit that like button to support us and subscribe to the channel to get more content like this and turn on notifications to find out when we go live. We run live sessions like this once or twice a week with the best folks in Prairie Ag and all kinds of topics. My name is Dan Eberhard. I run Growing the Future Productions. Our platform reaches thousands of producers across Western Canada and the U.S. every month. Today we have Drew Lerner, founder and senior agricultural meteorologist at World Weather Inc. Somebody commodity markets and producers worldwide have relied on for over 3.5 decades to make sense of what that weather is actually doing. The feedback has been, he's the one guy. He's the one guy that I trust to tell me the weather. Do you get that a lot, Drew? You're the one guy on planet Earth that people think
You
can
know,
actually predict.
yeah, I try to keep my ears closed to that kind of thing, right? I'm a little guy, but I can get a big head, and nobody wants
Wow,
that.
that
So,
would be awkward.
the
Um,
truth of the matter is, I don't know what I'm doing. I never have, and
oh,
somehow I managed to eke by for 47 years. So,
humble too. Humble too.
somehow, I don't know. It's all perception. It's all mirrors and smoke, really, to be honest with you. So.
Well, I think to be fair, you deal in probabilities, which is good as you can in the markets or the weather, or various other things that um, are swirling around our heads here in farming. But there's one thing every producer has to come to terms with. That's weather is the one thing you can never plan for, but you can plan around it. And we're going to hear from Darren about how they do that a little bit on the farm and the difference between the operations that navigate a tough season and the ones that get broken by it are it almost always comes down to how well they understand what was coming before it got there. So today that's what this is about. By the end of this session, you're going to have a clear picture of what 2026 is shaping up to be. Then you had 90 minutes go. Yes, 90 minutes. Drew has a lot to share. You are going to understand the 18-year cycle, how the drought monitor is setting up going into seeding, how El Nino could change the game mid-season, what producers are actually doing on their operations, and are we going to get 15 centimeters in Rosetown of snow tomorrow or not? The big question. Darren can use a little bit more moisture, I think, but you were saying there's 5 inches on the old crop intelligence moisture probes. Some folks were telling you, Darren, so that's not a bad start.
Yes. Hi. Yeah, talking to a few guys in the Rosetown area the other day, and before they yanked their probes out last fall, they were sitting around 5 inches in some places. So
Yeah.
yeah, we can't worry about that.
Yeah. So Darren's going to kick us off this morning with a little bit of an outlook on that and how they deal with weather on the farm. They got some of the most resilient crops in the area, let's just say. But put your questions into the chat. 225 on the call. Beautiful. So we expect some questions and we welcome it. We prep Drew. Of course, he's a PowerPointer. PowerPoint. He's gonna, but we are going to take questions and comments all throughout. So you can put it in the chat. You can put it in the Q&A. And let's make this really interactive. Drew said that he really enjoys that fireside chat. So let's challenge him. Let's pick his brain. This is for you. And but Darren, start us out. You mitigate some of what happens with weather that you can't control by virtue of how you guys farm and your practices, your system, your methodology. tell us a little bit about you, how you as a producer, south of Rosetown, Sovereign, Saskatchewan to be exact. How are you safeguarding or mitigating against weather events, good or bad, in farming?
Sure, we can go through a few things we do on our own farm. There's that saying, you can't do anything about the weather. That's true, but weather. When I hear the word weather, I think of stress right away. So abiotic stress, and anytime we got stress on our crops, that reduces yield. So, what can we do about that? Well, there's a few things we can do. Seed timing, the varieties, the rotation, the type of gear we're using and the type of soil we have, all those things that guys know. Some of the things, of course, we're doing as well. We use a seed primer on our seed, which is just simply a nutrition pack with a biostimulant in it. The reason we do that is usually our starts are either too dry, too cold, or too wet, which most people will have this year as well, depending where you're located. And it's the first 30 days that dictate the maximum yield potential. So all we're trying to do is get the best possible start we can, and putting a few goodies right on that seed and getting some good biology right around that seed to help protect it and reduce seedling stress and jack up vigor. Definitely pays off and helps us for that first stage of the crop. The second stage of the crop to me is, anything after that first month. And then we're talking again that abiotic stress, too hot, too dry, too wet, too cold, wind, hail, all these things that hammer down our yield. A healthy, strong, balanced plant can help get through those stressors a little better than one that's unbalanced. So, however you get there, a good soil health program is essential in warding off stress. So, a lot of things that hurt us is a big rain event. We don't get those nice general soakers anymore. It's a thunder shower or a big snow melt or too fast, doesn't soak in. So if we're in a dry area where we're really looking for water, which is usually our area quite often, anything I can do to help hold and retain more moisture holding capacity, get rid of that compaction layer and get the water to soak in rather than run off, that pays off in spades. And if we're too wet, which happens sometimes as well, or we're in areas that are definitely north of Saskatoon, going to be wet this year. Uh, the crops get wet feet if they can't get rid of that water in that rooting zone. So again, getting rid of that compaction layer in the top few inches, letting that water soak away into the profile so we can use it later. These are all little things that, nothing on their own is huge, but all these incremental little benefits at the end of the day add up to a pretty big number. And anything, again, as I said, anything we can do to reduce stress pays off.
Love it. Yeah, that makes a huge difference, and yeah, you can safeguard against the weather, even if you can't totally mitigate it. What do you think of that, Drew? Do you see farmers trying to safeguard against the weather in the states, or what do you see farmers doing that's effective?
Oh yeah, absolutely. All those things that he mentioned are right on. I think every farmer everywhere has those same sets of objectives to deal with. And the unfortunate thing from my perspective is that there's so much variety from one particular production area to another that everyone has their own set of problems that they have to deal with. So it is important to most folks that they have a pretty good handle on where they are going with the weather, which does add a lot of pressure for me. I do try to get us going in the right direction, but it's a complex machine, as you know. And so a lot of these forecasts have a lot of influence on what everyone decides to do. And I think it's always important. I think most everybody that's on here today is probably fully aware of the lack of lack of confidence in any weather guy. It's good to get multiple opinions and try to figure it out. But none of us are right, and it does make it an even greater challenge. But hopefully, when we get done with today, we'll be able to maybe point a little bit better the areas that are going to have, the too much moisture or the not enough, as the case may be, and hopefully I can help guide everybody to some degree.
Love it. Well, Ryan Denis is saying, is this where I find the weather seance? I don't know if is that included in your services, Drew? Maybe
I
you need a
uh,
subscription and then you get the seance.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We can do church services too. There's a lot of prayer involved with this here, let me tell you.
The power of prayer. Harry
For
Seaman
all of
here
us.
on the call, say a little prayer. Ryan Denise
Yeah.
saying, I told him he could do a little dance, but he said, fresh layer of snow here this AM. Maybe that's helping the attendance day too. I might need to stop dancing for a week. Let things dry out a bit. Have you been dancing again on TikTok, Ryan? I don't know, but I you can give us your slides here anytime, but I am kind of curious if you could frame it too. How are you quantifying something that has so many variables? We know that's, take the sun and you take the atmosphere and you take all the water cycles and the land, and there's so many variables. How do you quantify? Like what do you tell people you can actually tell them with a degree of accuracy?
Now, you see, you're asking questions that are going to lead me to a demise. So,
Oh,
no,
no.
no, yeah, no. The actual truth of the matter is, it is extremely complex. And by the time we're done today, I will have shown you a few of the things that we're going to deal with. These are going to be the primary issues that are going to influence our weather. But there is so much that influences the weather. If you just stop and think about the atmosphere, it is not a uniform, we call it a fluid, but as you go up in the atmosphere, the air switches direction. The winds switch around from one direction to another. You get different levels of moisture in the air. And so all of that has a big influence on whether you develop a strong thunderstorm or a weak one, or whether you don't get any moisture at all. And that's just in a daily forecast. Then we have all these broad-based, weather trends, the El Ninos and La Ninas and the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, all these things that we talk about. It gets pretty confusing, but they are all very much involved with influencing the weather. And so when we make these long range forecasts, we really have to stop and assess an awful lot, which is why we never get it right, which is why it's always, for the farmer, they always laugh at us weather guys. And from us weather guys, we laugh because we know we don't know what we're doing and pretend like we do. So I don't, not to come off sound like a big joke, but the bottom line is it's very complex. It's very difficult to get it right, but we have learned over the years something about the atmosphere. Some of us have at least, and hopefully that gets us a little closer to what will actually occur. And that's what I'm going to try to do here today for sure. And let
Drew,
me
you're
go.
the best of the folks that don't know what they're doing. Let's be real. Like there's everybody that doesn't know what they're doing, but you're at the top. And we did get a question, and this tells you what people is on people's mind, Drew. An anonymous attendee
Oh,
said,
that's dangerous.
I know they don't want anybody to know their true identity, but God bless you. Thanks for coming. What are the levels of subsoil moisture in Alberta? And how concerned are you, Drew?
Yes. In fact, let's just jump into this presentation as I can get some of the graphics up here. So I'm going to share the screen a little bit. And
And
uh,
Jason Dearborn has one comment here that you can kind of process as you go. Do you have a process for integrating weather data into machine learning? I'm unsure how this would
oh,
function with large language models, but I am aware that these have been adapted for health data at Harvard. So seemingly this could occur with weather data as well. Boom. Wow. That's a heavy one.
that is a heavy one. I don't know which one I should attack first. But that one, I'm gonna leave that for just a moment.
Yeah.
But I'll
Let's get
tell
into your
you,
presentation.
yeah, the whole future lies in that AI issue and the machine learning. I think there's tremendous potential, but I'm an old man, so I'm not sure I'm going to be able to be involved with that. But
Well, you can
there,
use AI just like anybody else, Drew. You don't have to be a young man to use AI.
yeah, that's true. All you got to do is push a button and it'll all come out for you, right? So, but yeah, I think that the bottom line on that issue is that there is an enormous amount of information that's out there and it's scattered in so many different places that somebody can make a fortune pretty quick by putting them all in the right place and then learning some of these long-term patterns that we're going to look at today a little bit. I do
Making a
think that
fortune. I like that idea.
yeah,
Making a fortune. That's a
yeah,
great way to start the call. We're going to make a fortune.
yeah, there you
Do it.
go. There you go. Well, let's take a look at that moisture
You were
situation
going to
here.
mention, though, just for everybody on the call, your first page, you didn't even mention it. You're so humble.
Oh,
You've got a subscription link there, Drew. Come
all
on.
right.
People want more of what you're giving. Support Drew. This is how he makes a living. He's giving us gold. He's making us a fortune on the call. Where do they sign up for your subscription here?
Yeah, in really all honesty, it all of our income is comes strictly from subscription services.
There you
So
go.
there's a lot of folks that are out there providing a lot of free information on the internet, and they're paid by somebody else. There maybe there some company has hired them to help advertise their products, and in the meantime, they can provide all the weather information they want for free. And it makes it really tough for us because we're subscription driven only. And so, yeah, if you guys are interested in a subscription, get a hold of us. You can certainly go to the address up there at the top. I'll try to get my
Worldweather.cc.
pointer. Yeah, CC is yep, that's the homepage.
Yeah.
Um, so you can certainly go there. You can give us an email, just send the email to this address, and then you can always call us. Most definitely. And really, we have a nice variety of products. If you don't want to read the forecast, we do audio versions of it. We do a daily forecast that goes out in detail, 7 days out across the prairies. We try to not only point out where the storms are going to be, but how much moisture is going to come from them, who's going to be more favored or over somebody else. We try to give a little bit of an impact on what that's going to do to the crops. A lot of our audio recordings will point to that a bit more. We do right now we're doing a once a week video, and when we get into the heart of the growing season, we'll probably be doing those twice a week. Andrew Owen does that, and Andrew will basically point out the weather trends across the prairies, and it goes out a couple of weeks, and we'll show you all the things that we're watching and what to watch for possible changes. But hopefully, he can point you in the right direction as to what to expect in week 2, for instance. In addition to all of that, we also have that infamous Canadian Prairie's agricultural weather prognosticator, which is a mouthful, but that is
Oh,
a newsletter.
oh,
It comes out about every 2 or 3 weeks, and a lot of what you see here today will be in that newsletter every 2 or 3 weeks. It provides an update on the long range forecast. It shows where the problem areas are across the prairies, and we'll even show you some of the areas that you guys compete with. So, if you're a durum wheat producer and you want to know what's going on in North Africa, we'll present that sometimes. If you're trying to produce some of the pulse crops, India is important to you, I'm sure, and Australia and all that kind of stuff we kind of include in those newsletters. So all that comes in the package. And it's not a bad deal,
do
actually. It's
do
pretty.
folks get access to you? Are you interacting with people on the subscription too, or
Yes, everybody can call in to the office and talk to a meteorologist. I'm here most of the time. Andrew is also available when necessary. And so, yeah, you can call in and talk to a weather person. There's other people on staff here too that can help during the hours that we're not around. So, yes, absolutely.
okay?
That's one
One
of the
more thing for
advantages.
you to get to here. Appreciate all the
Mhm.
interaction here. Jerome Isaac is saying, as always, hoping Drew gets a chance to touch on factors related to the Peace region. May
Oh, yeah.
planting season wet? Question mark. Fields are still snow covered, but melting steadily. Limited runoff to date. So yeah, everybody's wondering about their area. I'm sure you're going to cover it. We'll
Yeah.
let you roll here.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. And the Peace Country, my gosh, those guys up there, what a challenging year or two it's been for them. 2 years of terrible drought, and finally got some snow on the ground. Now we're worried about it's getting wet. So that is a potential issue. What we're looking at here is the North American Drought Monitor, and I wanted to start here because it's important to know what's going on, not only in our own backyard, but what's going on to the south of us. And the reason why I tell you that is that having broad-based dryness like you see down in the States in the spring, that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing for them. And if things go exactly wrong, it could go wrong for us too. And this is why I say that. Let me give you some basic weather knowledge here. First of all, in the US, it's pretty normal in the summer, in late spring, early summer, usually late May, early June, that we'll develop some kind of a high pressure ridge in the middle of the United States, usually kind of off center a little bit, more of the Rocky Mountains. But let me tell you, a high pressure ridge is basically high pressure aloft. But what it does is the air is sinking underneath that. So when you have sinking air and the air comes down to the ground, you compress it, right? The air is coming downward, it hits the ground, it has no place to go, so you start squeezing it. And as you squeeze the air, you release heat. And as you release heat, you also cause the air to dry. So under a high pressure ridge aloft, you typically get warmer and drier bias conditions. Now, the key here, that's just basic weather stuff. But the key is if the high pressure ridge is over an area that has wet soil, when you start heating up the air over that wet ground, you start to stimulate evaporation, right? And so the ground starts releasing moisture into the atmosphere as water vapor. And that water vapor gets warmed by the air around it and starts rising. So you've got the high pressure ridge where this air is supposed to be sinking, but all of a sudden you start lifting all this warm, moist air out of the ground and into the air above it. And as that moisture gets high enough into the atmosphere, you run into cooler air and you start creating condensation. You get showers and thunderstorms. You can't have showers and thunderstorms while you're in the middle of a ridge of high pressure because the high pressure ridge itself is all about stability. And you can't have all this shower and thunderstorm turbulent activity occurring while you've got a ridge around. So if you put a ridge of high pressure over a wet soil, it's likely to break down or be very weak. Okay. Now, that's not the case today, as you can see on the chart here. A big part of the central United States and the Southwest prairies are dry. So you put the high pressure ridge over these dry areas and there's no moisture to come out of the soil. So the high pressure ridge is going to be really happy about staying over that area because there's nothing that's going to push it around or break it down. And so the ridge will actually start to feed upon itself and it will actually intensify and become a more dominating feature. And one of the reasons we're concerned about the dryness in the States is because there's potential that this ridge, which is currently advertised to be fairly weak this year, could actually intensify and move up above the U.S. border into the parts of the prairies. Well, we're already dry in the southwestern prairies. So putting a stronger ridge of high pressure into the prairies during the summer could be a real problem for us, especially if we don't do better with eliminating some of the moisture deficits that we have out there right now. Now, this is not the official forecast. This is an official worry. Okay, so we're worried about the dryness in the Rocky Mountains in the US. We're worried about the dryness in the Southwest prairies, and we're worried about the dryness in the US plains. In these next few weeks, it is imperative that we break through the dryness and start improving the moisture profile so that we don't get into a more powerful ridge over the summer, because that can change our forecast and make it a more tough summer, to put it lightly.
One of the things I was thinking about when you're talking here too is what is the difference between soils that retain moisture like a sponge and soils where water hits and it just runs off or stays on the surface? That must have a dramatic
Oh,
impact on the moisture because moisture drives so much of the weather. We talk about the atmosphere and the temperature in the atmosphere, but water is the thing that drives everything, right?
well, that's right. That's right. And if you have a very porous, light soil, you're not going to keep that moisture very long. So obviously, you need the regular occurrence of precipitation. You start putting a ridge of high pressure over some of these areas of the lighter soils that don't retain that moisture. It doesn't take long to lose what moisture you've got, and then a more stressful environment. So for those areas, it's really important that we don't ever get into a blocking weather pattern. And well, these last, 4 years or 5 years, we've seen a lot of blocking weather. So in 2020 through 23, certainly was really tough that way.
Drew, we had
Um,
a couple more comments coming in here. Dave
sure.
Walner's asking about Halkirk specifically. So I don't know if you're going to drill down into a map of Alberta, but thanks for coming, Dave. We'll try and get to that. And Calvin Gavilan is saying, looking at the North American Drought Monitor graphic and living in the southwest part of Saskatchewan, specifically McCord area, I can hardly believe that we are only classed as moderate. We are heading into
Yeah.
year 9, I think, of little to no
Yeah.
moisture and certainly nothing close to adequate moisture. And we are bone dry already this spring. Thanks for your
Yeah.
knowledge, Drew. Marla Gavilan.
Yeah, absolutely. He's absolutely spot on. You know, these monitors, these drought products that we have are they don't do necessarily a good job in reflecting the super long trend. And he's absolutely right. This is the 9th year of drought, 8 and 9 years across many areas in southern Alberta and southwest, and even a few west central Saskatchewan locations. Now, the thing is about these drought monitors is that they take into consideration the precipitation that's occurred over the last few months, last year or two, or whatever the case may be, depending on which monitor you're looking at. In this particular case, we did well with precipitation at times last year, and the drought monitor is still stuck on that. Plus, it's been winter time, so the temperatures have been cool, and so we don't lose a lot of moisture. Now, as we start heating up in the spring, you're going to see a very quick, if it doesn't rain, you're going to see a very quick evolution back into a much more serious drought monitor, into something exceptional again. So that's a possibility. But I think for right now, what they're really showing here is just basically relative to the last year. We're dry, but it's not as critically dry as it was a year ago. If you remember a year ago, we were, I mean, it was just crazy dry and didn't have anything out there. And you're going to tell me, I'm sure you're going to come right back and tell me, well, we are still that way. And you're right. You picked up on a little bit of moisture last year for part of the season without a question, but there's some folks out there that are indeed probably drier in the absolute sense than they were a year ago.
Have you heard of
Um,
this, Drew? Lionel Ector is saying, looks like the dreaded Omega block. The dreaded Omega block. What is that?
well, an omega block, so I don't know where I can draw this. If we were to, actually, let me, can erase this off of here. I want to end show. I want to get rid of this. So let's do eraser. Let's get rid of this. And let's get rid of this and this. And let me go back and I'll draw
Oh,
you
wow.
what
You're
an
going to draw
omega
some
block
here.
is.
This is fun.
Yeah, yeah. So an omega block would be a block where you would have, this has to do with the jet stream. So the jet stream would flow in like this, and you'd get this ridge of high pressure, and then it would go back into a more zonal flow pattern like that. And there would also be, this is an omega block because it looks like omega, but there's also something called a Rex block. And a Rex block is similar, but it is different where it has a trough of low pressure that's underneath the ridge. And in both of these are blocking patterns, and they do create a limited amount of moisture depending on where the ridge was. Now, the original ridge that I put on this chart, if you noticed, I did not allow it to go originally north of the Canada border. So it wasn't really a true blocking pattern for Canada. That the weather systems would have moved over the top of the ridge. Now, what I've drawn here would definitely be a blocking pattern, because if you were an air mass, a storm system that was out here, you're going to follow the line more or less. So you're going to go up the back side of that ridge, and you're going to go over the top of it, and then you're going to go down on the other side. I didn't draw that very well, but you get the idea. So the storm system, this circle I've got out here, would actually go up into areas north of crop country and totally miss everybody in the prairies. Whereas if the amplitude of the ridge was a little bit lower, where it was just near the U.S. border, the storm systems would come in, they would go right up across the prairies. And so it matters how strong the ridge is. And that's why I presented this whole argument in the first place, because all the dryness in the States, that ridge could become stronger so that it does block the storms across the region. And just kind of giving you a little extra information here about that potential for ridginess, This is a chart. I know I'm coming back to Canada. Don't worry about it. But this all influences us greatly. In the upper right-hand corner is the snow cover chart from the 13th of April. And it doesn't probably tell you a whole lot, but there should be a lot more snow in the U.S. Rocky Mountains than what you see here. It should look a little bit more like the Canadian Rockies with the darker color. And it should be all the way down into I didn't draw that right either, but anyway, into the key U.S. Rocky Mountains. And there should be something like that in the Sierra Nevada and the Cascade Mountains. And what we're showing here is that there's not a lot of snowpack up here. And the chart on the left is snow water equivalency of what snow is in the mountains. These are percentages of normal for the date of the 13th. And all of these are just a few percentages of normal. And so this is an indication of how dry it is, how much snow is lacking out that way. And that increases my concern about that potential for ridginess that may develop later on down the road.
Is it
So
a mega block or Ogama? Ogama block about the center Saskatchewan drought derived from one small town. Tell the truth.
yeah, yeah. If you're in if you're in Ogama, yeah, it could become an Ogama drought. You're
They're
absolutely
gonna
right.
blame it on you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's a pretty good pun with the words there. I don't
Not
think I
bad. I
might
like
use that
that.
in future
Yeah.
broadcasts. That's
Yeah.
good.
Go ahead.
Anyway, this is the soil assessment. Now, the problem with the soil assessments at this time of the year is that it's after the long winter, and our soil moisture equation it doesn't handle the winter really well. So the top and subsoil end up mirroring each other quite a bit by the time you've gone through 3 or 4 months of just cold weather. But the dry bias that you see on here is, if I were to show you what last year looked like at this time, we would have been in the dark red across a big part of southern Alberta. Now, again, these are only estimated maps. There are areas like the gentleman that we talked about a little while ago that is critically dry, and it would be in the red. But in general, we are not as broad-based, extremely dry as we were a year ago. And I'll show that with some of the rainfall charts that have occurred here to kind of reflect that a little bit. But while I've got this up, I just want to note some of the greater precipitation areas, the greater moisture areas, the dark green and the light blue. Most of it's outside of crop country, which is indicated by the blue line. But you can see that some of the northern fringes in northeastern Alberta, northern Saskatchewan, certainly a larger portion of northeastern Saskatchewan, and then central through the southern parts of Manitoba. There's a lot of moisture out there and a lot of snow that is there as well, and that's locked up a lot of moisture that's going to go somewhere sometime. And we'll talk about that here shortly. Now, this is the precipitation that occurred in January and February. And a couple of things to note. For the prairies, for the crop region in the prairies, it's pretty obvious that there just hasn't been much moisture in the Palliser Triangle area and nearby areas. But one of the things I wanted to point out was all this green and all these bigger numbers that are north of crop country. This was important because if I showed you that drought monitor for North America back in December, you would have noticed that the drought not only impacted the southwestern part of the prairies, but it went all the way up to the Arctic. And what happened in January and February is we got some incredible snow events to occur north of the tree line, and that really helped to knock down the drought up that way. And let me tell you, when you have a drought that goes from Mexico to the Arctic, it is really hard to break it down and to eliminate it completely. Because what will happen when you have that much dryness around, you might get a storm system that comes in. Let's say a storm system comes into maybe Washington, Oregon, and Montana, right? Punches a hole in there. They get all this precipitation, but you still have all this dry air to the north. You got all this dryness to the south. And as soon as it stops raining or that storm system moves around, all that dry air just quickly fills the gap again. And you go right back into drought. And that's kind of where we are now in the Southwest prairies, because before last year, we were pretty darn dry in the Southwest prairies, right? We had all that moisture that came around during the growing season that helped to ease that dryness, but we still had terrible drought to the north and terrible drought to the south. And so as soon as that pattern broke down, what happened in the autumn? We went right back into drought. And all of a sudden we were back where we are now, where we don't have much moisture out there in some of the Southwest. Now, what's interesting about this pattern is it didn't change much. This is March. And again, you can see that we did a little bit better, I suppose, in pockets, but there's a fairly large amount of the prairies that didn't do very well with precipitation. Some areas better than others. I think Darren was telling us that they're in the Rosetown area. It's all about isolated thunderstorms. Well, this is kind of a similar situation. We get some areas that got some significant moisture, and not too far away, there's very little. And that was kind of the problem. One of the areas that did well over the winter was really west of Highway 2 in Alberta. A lot of moisture out there, some pretty decent snows. And then, of course, across the area north of the tree line. When we got into April, the first half of this month, we're still dealing with somewhat of a restricted amount of moisture across those same southern areas of the prairies. Really, nobody's done all that great. We do have, or have had, a little bit more moisture occur in a narrow band across some of the areas in southern Alberta. We've got a storm system coming up here real quickly that's going to help that situation. But we really haven't done much to fix that. And I'm going to show you one of the reasons why that has been the case, but I'll come to it in just a moment. I wanted to show you the snow cover chart. Now, a big part of crop country is snow free, at least in the southwestern half, that area that hasn't done well with precipitation. Of course, it is snow free. But we've got a lot of snow on the ground in the north. Really from Edmonton through the Saskatoon area down just north of Regina and over into the Brandon area. Everybody north of that line still has a lot of snow on the ground for the most part. There's a pocket or two that's not that way. But we're having trouble shaking off some of this snow. And it's pretty deep in a few pockets out there, getting upwards to 2 to 2.5 feet. And it's mid-April, if you guys hadn't figured that out. So this is kind of a concern. While we've been talking about the dryness in the Southwest, we actually are going to have a little bit of a problem with having moisture around in abundance in those northeastern areas where the snow is, if we can't get it to warm up better with the pattern being what it is. So we've kind of got a two-faced situation going on there at the moment. And then for the Peace Country guys, you can see that the Alberta side of the Peace Country has got a lot of snow to go. Even on the British Columbia side, there's still some snow significance out that way too. And so their concern about getting into the fields there is just as legitimate as it is about the northeast part of the prairies. And so we're going to take a look at that and address that as well. First of all, the snow water equivalency in that snow is fairly significant. These charts are just a little bit they're not totally reliable. They don't do a good job estimating the moisture content, but it gives us an idea. So if you were to take a look at those darker blues, it would suggest that there's moisture somewhere around 10 to 12 inches, and that's not right. There's no way there's that much moisture in that snow pack, but there's still a significant amount, and it does have to go somewhere. And we do have frost still that's in the ground, so that area is going to have to deal with it. And we keep getting snow in this area. We got a snowstorm coming up right now, and I'm going to kind of end this. We're going to go and take a look at this storm system that Darren was talking about, worried about that 18, or not 18 inches, but worrying about getting some
18
snow out his
inches.
way. Yeah, no kidding.
Wow, it has upgraded our forecast here, Drew.
Yeah, and that's how rumors start, and that's how I go out of business.
Yeah,
So watch it.
you can break the internet today. Drew Hunter
Uh,
said 18 inches in Rosetown.
yeah, there we go. All right, so I'm gonna focus in on the Western Prairies here. I apologize to all of you in Manitoba because you can't see what's going on over there, but I want to start here because this is where everybody's focused on at the moment. So, all right, so we have two storm systems over these next few days that will produce some precipitation. The first one's going right across the north area, north of Highway 16, right up against the tree line, the very same areas that we just looked at have all the snow on the ground. And what are they going to do? They're going to get more snow. So that occurs today and ends sometime this evening and overnight tonight. And just to kind of excuse me, to point out the amount of snow that may occur. It's a fairly significant amount there in the northern fringes. This is going to be Cold Lake, Spirit Wood, Prince Albert, maybe just to the north of Melfort, over to Teesdale, and on up into DePaul, Manitoba. That'll be the area that gets it. These are in inches, and so fairly significant up that way. But this first system really doesn't do anything to change the situation farther to the south. So let's deal with that as we get into the second event. But this is the moisture content that the model is suggesting for this first event. And it's fairly significant. Again, you put that much moisture on the ground when you've got all that snow to melt, and you got a potential issue with it being too wet there when we do warm back up. Now, a lot of that's northern fringe crop country, but there's some guys that produce there, and you're probably on here, and you probably don't want me to tell you that, it's not a problem. It is going to be a problem up that way. Notice the peas country here, though. We kind of didn't say too much about that over there, but there is a fair amount of moisture that's being advertised for them, too. And if we back this up a little bit, they're involved with the snow already. And I think that was the comment that was made, is that, are we going to be wet all spring long? And this is just the one event. Now, that system that's up in the Peace Country today is going to drop down the Front Range. We're going to go through the Edmonton and Edson areas down into the Coronation and Hannah areas with the snow event. And we get this low pressure system in Montana. Now, this Montana is a traditional Montana low. This is so encouraging, guys. It's really important to pay attention to the fact that we actually have a Montana low on the charts in April. The reason why I say this is so important is that we haven't seen Montana lows very often in the last several years. And that's the whole reason why we don't get moisture occurring in southern Alberta or west central through southwestern Saskatchewan. And this is really important because the pattern that we're seeing right now is a pattern that should repeat later on in the spring and early summer. And as long as that ridginess that we were worried about in the States doesn't get too out of hand, we should be able to shift this pattern a little bit more to the north, and we should be able to enhance it a little bit, and we'll get more moisture to occur in these dry areas in Palliser's Triangle. So I look at this as very encouraging, even though it's only mid-April and we're a long ways from really the heart of the summer yet. But as the storm system goes from Montana into Manitoba, we do get a fairly significant amount of snow to occur. This is going to be mostly tonight and tomorrow, and then it will end on Friday. And you can see we get snow all the way back up even into northern Saskatchewan with this event. And we're going to be looking at a fairly significant amount of moisture. So for some of you guys that are in the Southwest that you are hurting for moisture, southern Alberta, unfortunately, doesn't get involved again with the higher volumes. But again, you should still be encouraged because we did get a Montana low. And if we can do that again later, when it matters more, when moisture is more available, I think you'll find it rains in southern Alberta. And that is my expectation. You're just going to have to be patient. I know you hate it when guys tell you that because you've been waiting 9 years. 9 years you've been waiting, right?
We need some good news, Drew. Come on.
Yeah, there is reason to be encouraged, though. Notice the moisture in, the Highway 1 corridor southward is pretty impressive there. And the snow that's supposed to occur is also fairly significant in that region. This is total for both systems combined. So for those of you in Manitoba, I don't want you to feel totally dejected here. So let's take a look at the situation over
Well, we did have a comment
that
there.
way.
They need that ridge to shift east over southern Manitoba to dry them out. It's funny how
Yes,
that's a different
yes,
dynamic.
yes. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of moisture there. It's a heavier soil. It's a whole big different picture. And we that area, yeah, I think you guys need to be prepared for a little bit more moisture, especially when you get into June. I think it's going to get pretty wet across that area. But anyway, you can see the storm system that's out there tomorrow will not be a huge event for Manitoba, but it is going to add a little bit more insult to the injury out there. Moisture totals are still going to run up, maybe something of the order of 3 to around 13 millimeters, or maybe a little band in there of some greater amounts. And yes, there will be some snow that falls as well. But anyway, I kind of wanted to point out that a little bit in the middle of the PowerPoint, and we'll go back and look at this again and keep that in mind. Let's see, where's my controls for that? Let's see. All right. So, moving along, and what we really want to do is get a little bit more focused on where we're going to go over these next few weeks and months. All of these things, you were asking me at the beginning of this, what are all the things that are involved with, the forecast for this year? And my goodness, the list is long this year. It's very long. When I do these long range forecasts, most of the time I've got two or three that are listed that are primary influences. But this year we've got the abating La Nina. That's what's been dominating our winter. We've got this El Nino coming up, and I'm sure you guys have heard about the super El Nino coming up, right? And that we're all going to die, sometime later in the year.
What? I didn't get that memo.
Yeah, well, they hype this stuff up so much, and I just want to encourage you guys to not pay attention to a lot of that hype because it's nonsense. It's just to sell advertisement or whatever, but it isn't reality. So anyway, we'll talk more about that in a minute. We've already covered the lingering drought in North America. We've also got the lunar cycle. Now, the lunar cycle is basically the 18-year cycle, and you'd mentioned that at the beginning of the show, Dan, that I'm going to tell you all about the 18-year cycle. We'll certainly delve into it a little bit, but that is always one of the most influential patterns that you can look at during doing long-range forecasts for any year. It's always there. It's very important, but it is influenced by El Nino and La Nina, and all these other things we talk about. So we're going to look at some of that. As it turns out, with the development of El Nino, the timing in which El Nino evolves is imperatively important to North America, maybe a little bit more so for the US than it is for Canada. But what happens in the US has an impact on our weather. So we do need to pay attention to the timing and what kind of influence we're going to get from that. So we'll look at that. We are also in the second year past the solar maximum. Now, I told you earlier, I'm an old man. And I've been doing this for a very long time. And when I first started, we did not have computers. And we only had the only tool we could use for long range forecasting was the solar cycle. And it has to do with sunspots. And I don't know if we have time to go into all that right now, but there's a very definite correlation to the number of sunspots, which are dark blotches that appear above the sun. The number of those spots has a direct impact or influence, I guess, on weather in the world. And at certain times in the solar cycle, we know that there's certain kind of weather anomalies that will occur. For instance, and I guess I should clarify too, those sunspots go from a very minimal number to a maximum number. It takes about 5.5 years to go from the minimum to the maximum, and then another 5.5 years to go from the maximum back to the minimum again. So it's a regular cycle. And that drought that occurred in 2020 through 2023, we call that that was the 22-year solar cycle. But basically, we know that when we go from the solar minimum to the solar maximum, those years tend to be drier biased. And so that's one of the things we know that we can count on. And we also know that every other solar cycle during that period from the minimum to the maximum is always super more intense than the other one. And that's where we were this past year. It's called the 22-year solar cycle because that period from the solar minimum to the solar maximum and back to the solar minimum again is about 10 to 12 years, which is an 11-year cycle. And you put two of them together, it's a 22-year cycle. Okay,
And
that's
what
where we
about that
come out.
Gleisberg cycle? Or is that a longer loop? Are you familiar with that?
Yes, the Gleisberg cycle is much longer. In fact, some folks think that it's an 80-year cycle. Some believe it's something a little bit shorter and something a little bit longer, but it is associated with the solar cycle as well, and has to do with a more long term cycle with the minimums of the sunspots being more minimal and a more prolonged period of solar minimum years. It's kind of complex, and I don't know that we want to delve into that too much
No,
today.
I'm just curious.
But
Robert
yes,
Angelic mentioned it, and I thought it was neat, an 80-year cycle on the sun. And who knows you're trying to put together all these pieces to figure out how they interact, not just on a singular basis.
that's right. That's right. And if you don't get one right, then you're going to mess up all the others when you try to interact them, right? And that's the challenge. One of the things I was trying to head into here was that we are, we normally have that drier bias from the solar minimum to the solar maximum. We're now 2 years past the maximum. And that's why last year was not as hot. That's why last year we started to see a little bit more moisture occur, and we should be a little bit more into that than we were last year. So even though we're starting off with dryness and some issues in the Southwest, and we've got still some lingering drought in the Peace Country and even some dryness in the Northeast, but we also have all that snow to deal with. So we are moving out of the old pattern and into the new one, and that's very important to note. And then lastly is the ocean water temperatures. Now, these are temperature anomalies in the oceans around the world. And the very first thing I want you to notice how much warm water there is relative to normal. We're not going to go into a global warming talk unless you guys want to do that, but
I think we should
I think,
avoid that. Yeah,
yeah, I
let's not
think
go there.
so. But
I don't want my chat to blow up here.
yeah, no kidding. And 90 minutes will turn into 90 days. Okay.
Can't afford it. Can't afford it.
Yeah. So the reason why I'm showing you the whole world right now is primarily because as you warm the water, right? It's the same thing like in your kitchen. If you put a pot of water on your stove and you warm it up, what does it do to the air in your room, right? It's going to release more water vapor and it's going to make your room more humid. So the warmer you make the ocean water temperatures around the world, the more moisture is in the air. And therefore, when storm systems come and go, they're going to carry with them much more moisture than they would otherwise. That's number one and very important thing to note. The other thing is in this particular year, we do still have a lot of warm water off the west coast of North America. And as you know, most storm systems come in from the Pacific and move, across Canada or the U.S., however it is. But as it goes across all this warm water, it picks up that moisture and carries it inland. So having all that warm water off to the west is one more reason why there should be a little bit more tendency to get more moisture in the coming year than we've had in past years. So this has to be factored in with the El Nino and the departing La Nina and everything else we talked about. But I just kind of want to point out the fact. And I also want to point out, too, that it's also warm in the Gulf of America. It's also warm in the Atlantic. So the whole North American continent is surrounded by warm water, which is going to help promote more active weather as we go deeper in time. But we still have a lot of drought to deal with today. All right. One of the other things I wanted to tell you before we get into the forecast is I wanted to tell you that we showed you the precipitation maps January through really April, and I told you that the pattern hadn't changed any. Well, this is the upper air pattern that goes with that precipitation. And if you look at each of these charts, you'll notice that there's no change to speak of. The general pattern is the same, whether you're looking at November or whether you're looking at February. And that pattern is one that includes a ridge of high pressure over western parts of North America and a trough of low pressure over the east. And if you're a parcel of air, when you look at these charts, these are 18,000 foot charts. These are wind flow charts, basically. So if you're a parcel of air coming into the BC coast, you're going to follow the line. So you'll come into, in this case, come into southern BC and go down through eastern Montana, you end up all the way down along the U.S. middle Atlantic coast. And if you're a parcel of air up here farther north, you're going to follow the lines. So you're going to move right across the prairie. So when you have a pattern like this where the lines are bowed upward or northward, that's a ridge of high pressure. And when those lines are dipping down into a trough, what looks like a trough, it's a trough of low pressure. All right. So this has been the pattern for the last several months. If you recall our discussion about ridges of high pressure, you know that there's sinking air underneath that high pressure ridge. So everybody that's underneath the ridge part of these charts should have a warm and dry bias, okay? Those that are in the eastern part of North America are in the trough of low pressure, and they're going to have cooler bias and some periods of precipitation. And this has been the trend since last November. That's why the Southwest prairies are so dry. That's why the U.S. Rocky Mountains are so dry. That's why the U.S. plains are so dry. And that's why we've got all this moisture in the U.S. eastern Midwest and the Middle Atlantic region. So this explains everything. And what you need to know is that this pattern has to break down before we're going to get any rain. Okay. So one last thing I want to do covering this particular pattern is that it's had two phases to it over the course of the winter. The chart on the left is what's been most dominating. Ridge of high pressure again over western portions of the continent and the trough over the east, okay? But every once in a while, during the winter, we got into this other weird pattern off to the right here, where we suddenly got a trough of low pressure over the western United States and western Canada, and kind of a double trough, and then the ridge was farther to the east. This kind of pattern produces all kinds of precipitation in the U.S. With a strong jet stream, a lot of storms moving southwest to northeast, and you get all this rain. And if you've been paying attention to what's going on in the U.S., these last 2 weeks, it's been raining like crazy across most of this area. And that's because this chart on the right-hand side is the one that's been dominating these last 2 weeks, whereas the chart on the left has been dominating the last 5 months. Okay. In Canada, looking at the chart on the right, Canada still has trouble getting precipitation events because all the energy on the jet stream is down in the U.S. You get little disturbances that come up. You can see this little dip in the lines right here. This is a little disturbance that comes up into western parts of Canada. We get a little bit of light precipitation, but there's no big, massive storm system that comes through. And that's why we're not seeing these generalized precipitation events. Now, the thing I want you to know is that we're going to be fighting with these same two weather patterns for still another 4 or 5, maybe 6 weeks. And so we're not necessarily going to get high volumes of moisture in Canada, in the prairies, until two things happen. Number one, the jet stream naturally works its way northward as we warm up the atmosphere as we go into May and June. So what you see in the States on the right-hand side here, if that pattern were to prevail as we go forth in the next 2 months, it would go to higher and higher latitudes. And eventually, this active weather pattern, southwest and northeast flow, would eventually relocate so that it impacts this area. And so storms would then generate more moisture in Manitoba and southeastern Saskatchewan. They would be wet like the U.S. Midwest is now. So this is important because that is where I think we're going to go. Now, what happens to the western prairies in that change of things? We're probably going to see a combination of the chart on the right and the chart on the left occurring during a big part of these next 2 months. And so as we break down the ridge that you see over Western Canada on the left-hand side here, and you go to the other pattern, you're going to get these small disturbances that are going to come through. And so you're going to get opportunities for rain. It is not going to stay absolutely dry, but you're going to have to wait, at least some of you are going to have to wait several weeks yet before we can get a good solid storm system to come into the region. One other factor that comes out of the chart that we looked at that's been dominating the last few months is that if you're a parcel of air, again, following the lines, if you're coming out of the Arctic, you're going to go straight down into the eastern part of the United States, right? And so there's going to be all this cold air. Now, I'm going to point this out to you again to help you market-wise, because this pattern you see, it could evolve again in the U.S. at some point during the spring, and it could actually generate frost and freezes that are later than normal in the U.S. Midwest, and could help to pump up the market prices for you guys. You won't necessarily be involved with the cold, but it is a pattern that's been repeating. And we had a significant bout of this in early February, where we had all kinds of freezes that occurred in the U.S. Gulf of America coast and all kinds of cold in the Midwest. And it was repeated in March 14th through the 17th. We got a similar pattern to occur, and we got freezes all the way down into the interior South. They had to replant corn in parts of the Delta because of the freezes that occurred in March. Well, we're getting ready to see this pattern possibly develop again. The time between January 31 and March 17th is 45 days. And if you go back into December and November, the same pattern has occurred. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be like that all the way through our growing season, but I'm willing to suggest that we're going to see it return at some point when we get into late April and early May. And we could see it again in June. And if it happens in June, the jet stream is going to be much further north. The cool pool may be somewhere over eastern parts of Manitoba and western Ontario, which is a big reach right now. But I just kind of wanted to point out the fact that there's potential that some of the U.S. may be vulnerable to late season frost and freezes. There's only a small chance that we'll see that in Manitoba, and an even less chance of it in Alberta or parts of western Saskatchewan. So the farther west you are in the prairies, the more unlikely it is that you're going to have a late season frost freeze event. But as you go eastward, it becomes a little bit more of a probability, but much more so for the U.S. and for eastern Canada crop areas like Ontario and Quebec, rather than any of our region. Now, the charts you're looking at here, I wanted to give you an idea what's going to happen over the next 3 weeks, okay? We already kind of looked at this pattern where it's going to rain a lot in the U.S. And really, you can see that pattern here in the today, the April 16th chart. You got a storm system coming down from the Pacific Northwest. You got another one in the plains. Up in Canada, you've got this tiny little wiggle right in here. This is that snow event that's occurring in the northern part of Saskatchewan today. And this system that you see back here in the Pacific Northwest is how we get the snow event tonight and tomorrow across the southern part of the prairies, okay? Because this system is going to move eastward. But the main point of this is that as we go forward in time, this is April 18th, just a few days, just a couple of days from now, there's going to be a big change where colder air is going to come out of the north and come back across the prairie. So we're going to get pretty nippy again behind the snow event. That trough very quickly moves off into the northeastern part of the United States and eastern Canada. There will be another reinforcing shot of cooler air here, a little trough of low pressure that's going to drop across the prairies as we get out towards the early part of next week. And that'll bring some additional cool weather. In the meantime, there's another storm in the U.S. down here over California, and there'll be a frontal system that goes like this. But this system may be too far to the south to bring moisture to the Canadian prairies. So the reason why I'm showing you this is that for the next 5 days, you've got two storm systems that are going to impact the prairies. Once we get into next week, we're going to see a pattern change. That pattern change is most noted in the bottom row of charts. You'll notice that there's more ridginess back over the western part of Canada. April 27th, there's ridginess over the heart of the prairies. I can't see the date, May 8th, the ridge is still over British Columbia and Alberta. And you get out to May 15th, and suddenly we start moving the ridge to the middle of North America here. And you kind of see that. It's not a real strong ridge, but the point of this is that this active weather that we've had here recently for northern Saskatchewan, northern Alberta, northern Manitoba, and to a much lesser degree in the southern prairies is about to end. So these two storms we've got left to go, we're going to see a lot less precipitation after this for the next 2 or 3 weeks. It won't be dry, absolutely. We'll still have disturbances, but we're not going to get any opportunity for high volume precipitation events because we've got weak ridginess coming up. And the ridge is also going to help us warm up a little bit. So those those areas that are dealing with the extra snow on the ground in northern Saskatchewan, even the Peace Country, and parts of Manitoba, they're going to have an opportunity to melt that down a little bit faster as we go forward through the week next week and the following week after that. These are the temperature anomalies. The chart on the left is for the 15th through the 20th. You can see there's quite a bit of cold air. If you recall, we get that northwest flow coming in, drops all that cool air down across the region. Then only lasts for a few days, and then we start warming up the western part of the prairies. In Alberta and British Columbia, the cool air starts moderating, but it does drop down into the U.S., and that's from that trough of low pressure we just looked at. So the coldest and the wettest period is going to be over these next few days, and then we're going to take a break and we're going to start moving a little bit more into spring. So, now that gets us
Wow.
to the
Okay.
30-day outlook.
I was going to ask you to take a breath. You're doing great. That's amazing. Unbelievable amount of information. I was kind of curious. There's a way to make money here, and I hope Ryan Denis in the lunchbox is listening. You said a market bump. You said a market bump in there. You talked about a market bump. There was a market bump from the frost. I just thought it was interesting. Have you seen this before? How much are you able to gauge a little bit on that side? Do you tie in the market information to the weather, obviously,
Yes.
fundamentals?
Yes, yes, we have that's kind of a little bit of a different service that we have, but we also do that for you guys
Mhm.
as well. But yeah, most definitely one of the big things that we do isn't just to forecast the weather. We try to interpret a little bit as to what the outcome is for you guys to get into the fields and do your thing. And what the potential is for production, but we also have to monitor the marketplace, and we provide a lot of information to brokerage services. We provide consultation services for food companies, people that actually take what you guys are producing, and they need to buy it in order to make their products, and so they want a heads up as well as you do as to what's going to happen to the prices, the futures prices down the road. Do we buy that wheat now, or do we wait for 6 months because there's going to be a big increase in drought in China or whatever? So there are a lot of folks that are looking at the weather from a little different perspective, but are equally influenced as you are. And yeah, we provide
Speculators too.
services for them.
Speculators are wondering what might happen based on the weather too. They're trying to get ahead of the curve, maybe.
That's right.
Where are
Absolutely.
you in your presentation? We've got 25 minutes left. We've got lots of questions. How are you feeling, Drew? Where
Uh,
are we at with your slides here? A scale out of 1 to 10 percentage
yeah.
wise or
We're probably, yeah, I've got about, what, 10 slides left, 9 slides, but these will go faster because
okay.
I've done all the
Yeah, we got a lot of
explaining.
questions here too. So
Okay, let's just fly through it.
sure.
Already, obviously, the next 30 days, as I just alluded, there's going to be less precipitation around after these two storms coming up. So, and we're going to warm it up in the west, be cooler in the east. Skipping this commentary, just was going to point out the El Nino that's coming up. And again, I don't need to show you the graphics. The bottom line is El Nino is coming. There's no question about it. La Nina is more or less dead today. We're going to be influenced by El Nino. And what is El Nino going to do to the prairies? I've got a series of charts here that I kind of wanted to show. These are two different patterns that are going to be influencing the prairies at the same time. Okay, the top row is going to be those years that we move from a January La Nina to a June El Nino, which is what those two charts I just kind of blew through are saying, that we're going to have El Nino by June. So these are precipitation anomalies. The yellows, oranges, and reds are below normal precipitation. The blues and pinks are above normal precipitation. The top row is only keyed in on El Nino development by June. The middle row is the 18-year cycle data. So if you want to know what the 18-year cycle data is saying without any influence coming from El Nino, that's what you want to look at. And then the bottom row, unfortunately, is 1972. And 1972 is the one year that appears in both sets of data. And if you're any kind of an analyst, you know that when you find a year that's in two different sets of data for two different reasons, and it still shows up, it's a year you want to pay attention to. Now, I say that, and I'm going to turn right around and tell you I don't like 1972. I think it's too dry. So as we go forward through the charts, I just want you to know that as we go forward. Now, so El Nino is going to have an influence on the prairies, and so is the 18-year cycle. So if the 18-year cycle for the month of April has suggested kind of a normalish pattern here, you got a few pockets that are drier, a few pockets that are wetter, but it's a pretty normalish pattern. And that's kind of been the case. We've definitely had some more pockets of drier than wetter necessarily, but that's been the case. For the years that we move into El Nino, it looks pretty much the same. And so there's not a whole lot to dispute there. When we get into May, the 18-year cycle data suggests a greater amount of precipitation in central and southern Alberta and southern Saskatchewan. But we keep this, well, we don't keep it, but we develop a little bit of a drier tendency in the northeastern part of the prairies, Manitoba, and into the northeast part of Saskatchewan. The El Nino years are also kind of drier tendencies. It seems to show up in there. There's a little bit more moisture in Alberta, that kind of jives with the 18-year cycle a little bit. Now, when you're looking at these charts, you've got to meld them together. So 18-year cycle has a drier bias in the Northeast prairies, and so does the El Nino year. So obviously, the eastern prairies will have more of a drier tendency than the West will. The West has a wetter bias in the 18-year cycle data, but El Nino provides a little less moisture, but still a little better precipitation. So you kind of get the idea where I'm going to go with the forecast there. 1972 again is the anomaly of the anomalies, and you can look at it. I really don't think 1972 is going to be what we're going to see this year necessarily. So in June, the El Nino years turn wetter. The 18-year cycle years kind of mixed. We've got more moisture in Alberta, but we've got the Northeast prairies here that are kind of dry, and the return of drier tendencies in the Southwest part of the prairies. That's a little worrisome. Now, these are just averages of these other years in the cycle, and you can see the years listed here. It doesn't mean that you're destined in southern Alberta to go dry as it looks here in June. This is just an indicator of what we're going to be trying to, mix into our forecast. But remember, while you're looking at the drier 18-year cycle data, you have to factor in the fact that El Nino years tend to be wetter in that area. Okay, so this is part of the complexity of doing these long-range forecasts. When we get into July, the one thing I want you to note is that we still have this drier tendency in the Northeast, and to some degree, it's kind of there still in the 18-year cycle data. But if you take these top two rows of data and you meld them together, you have to come to the conclusion that we've got good mixed weather coming up over the growing season, that it's not just going to be chronically dry or wet, with the exception maybe of northeastern Saskatchewan and northern and west central parts of Manitoba. I think those areas do have a tendency here to have less precipitation than the rest of the region. But if you remember, those are also the areas that are wettest in regard to the most snow on the ground and the greatest potential for having excess moisture around when we get through melting the snow. So what'll end up happening in the Northeast prairies is we're going to go through a period where it's going to be slow getting into the fields and slow planting. And then we're going to notice a decline in precipitation as we go forward through the summer. And so we may actually get a little bit of a drier bias to show up in some of that region as time goes along. So that's the big key for those folks up that way. Peace Country, if you've been looking at the charts, it's a good mix. We have some drier times, we have some wetter times. I don't think that we're necessarily going to get excessively wet, but we are going to be on the wetter bias of normal. I'm going to skip through these because these are based on years that are El Nino comes later in the year in December. The only thing you need to know, not December, but in the fourth quarter. The biggest thing you need to know is that it's a lot wetter. El Nino events that come later in the year are much wetter for the northern U.S. plains, the upper Midwest, and southeastern Canada's prairies for the months of April, June, and August. So if for some reason this El Nino doesn't come in June but shows up in August or September, there might be more rain in the eastern prairies than what we've talked about today. Officially, the forecast is this. We've already looked at April 15th to May 15th. So from May 15th to June 15th, we should start seeing that wetter tendency in the southeastern prairies. We will also pick up on an increase in precipitation in the Peace Country over through the Swan Hills region into areas north of Edmonton over to Athabasca. Might still have a little bit of a below average precipitation bias in the Southwest, but it shouldn't be prohibitive rainfall. We are going to see timely rains that will occur. They're just going to be lighter bias probably in this May 16 to June 15 period. A little warmer bias in the month of May in general. That will be a little worrisome when we're in the early part of May because we're still going to be dry in the Southwest prairies. So you're going to be on the phone calling and complaining when, it's too warm, it's too dry.
They call you and say that?
That's right. That's
True.
it. That's we're here. We're
It's
psychologists.
too wet, it's too dry.
But when we get into the second half of June and into July, that Southwest will finally start doing better. In fact, most areas will, with the exception of that Northeast, like I said before, I'm a little bit concerned that that area will have a drier tendency. And when you're looking at that, don't interpret that as drought. Interpret that as below normal precipitation. There still will be some moisture. It's just going to be light. And then the summer in general, you can see it's not a bad scenario. So that's pretty much it. The only other thing I was going to show you guys was charts from the past showing the ridge of high pressure over North America. This is from the year 2023, which was the last time we had a year where we moved from La Nina into an El Nino between January and July or June. And just looking at that year, there was a ridge of high pressure that was in the middle of North America in June, but it wasn't a super strong ridge. And we had a trough of low pressure out here over the western part of the U.S. So storm systems coming into the west part of the U.S. coast would get churned up to the northeast and move up the backside of the ridge. So we would get an opportunity for some rain. That's in June. In July, though, in 2023, the ridge shifted out to the west. And this was a little bit more of a blocking pattern. So when precipitation came in, it would go over the top of the ridge and it would dry out when it was going through this section and then would refire up somewhere over the eastern part of North America. And this would also be a drier tendency in the northeast prairies there in July. In August, the ridge is in the middle, pretty much in a normal position, but these lines that are confluent, moving together, across Canada suggests a mid-level area of dry air would be prevalent. So it would be a little drier scenario in 2023. And of course, that was part of the the 22-year solar cycle, and it was already dry. So that was a whole different ball game there. So we can pay attention to the ridge, but we got to keep in mind that it was in a different part of the solar cycle. We're in a wetter and cooler part of the cycle now than we were then. Another year is 1972. We've already talked about it. Just take a look at the ridge. There's a ridge in June that was over the middle of the U.S. Again, storm systems were able to go up over the top of it in June and bring rain into parts of the prairies, and then they would move off to the east and southeast. In July, the ridge was flat, which means storm systems were able to move across North America from west to east. The only problem was this confluent pattern right in here suggested less than normal precipitation. Again, the northeast part of the prairies in particular kind of locked out of the moisture profile, and that continued to show up in August. So this is all kind of reinforcing the fact that we're probably not going to see an abundance of moisture in the northeast prairies, but out to the west, I think we'll do okay, and into the south as well. It should be a fairly good year. So that's it.
Is that
Turn it
all
over
you
to you.
got? Is that
Oh,
all you got, Drew?
don't get me started now. I got a lot
Oh,
more.
oh, you
I
got a
want to
lot
make
more. Well,
I want to make sure that
I,
you would get
yeah.
the questions answered. So we'll stop there.
Oh, I love it. No, it's great. It's incredible. You have a little bit of a passion for the weather, hey, Drew?
I tell you, I'm a crazy man, crazy man.
You are crazy. Okay, well, I do think we'll probably go a little bit longer than the 90 minutes, and folks can decide if they want to stay or not. But we'll try and get there. We got some great questions here. So, Jason Dearborn is asking, Drew, could you just touch on how the data is collected for these drought monitor models, please? How granular is it relative to geofencing?
Yeah, the majority of the data comes from the first order weather reporting stations around the world. So there's multiple different levels of weather observing stations that are out there. And I think they've been making an effort to add in the second tier of data levels. But I think a lot of the co-ops are not included there. And those are the ones that would report, like the gentleman we talked about earlier today in southern Alberta, telling you it hasn't rained for 9 years and it's been really dry. That's not a part of the drought monitor because it's too localized relative to the rest of the data set, and it didn't appear. Doesn't mean it's not real. For sure, it is very real, right? But most of the data comes from first order stations and maybe a few second order stations. It's always inclusive rainfall, of course, and temperature. That's basically what drought monitors are made of. There's an evaporation equation that is applied there. Most of the drought monitors use some derivation of the Thornweight evaporation equation, but there are models that try to go beyond the Thornweight equation. But anyway, that's kind of the basics of it.
Sure. Walter Van E is asking how much of the trend you're seeing in this weather pattern is a result of weather modification, quote unquote. Is it even part of your study when what is happening?
Very good question. Each weather guy out there is going to have his own personal opinion about modification. I'm a bit of a skeptic. I do know that you can modify the weather to some degree, but the problem I have with the whole study is that we don't have a control. In other words, we don't have two Earths. So we can speculate all we want.
Yeah.
If we put this dust into, southern Alberta and it rains downstream, how in the world can we compare that to if we didn't put dust in the same atmosphere, right? We don't have the same atmosphere available. There's nothing that we can compare it to. And so there's all kinds of speculation as to whether it works or doesn't work. And the problem is, as I mentioned early in the talk, that as you go higher into the atmosphere, there's all kinds of changes in wind direction and relative humidity and air temperature, and all of that influences whether it rains or doesn't rain, whether you put a seed in there or not. And so it's hard to say, without having a complete copy of the Earth in exactly the same conditions, you can't really come to a definitive conclusion that it does or does not work. Yes, it's in theory, you put it into a laboratory, it works, and that's what everyone runs with. But it's very difficult when you seed a small part of the atmosphere in southern Alberta, for instance. What's to keep the air from central Alberta from flowing in and mixing with that and causing that seed to change totally? Whereas you might seed somewhere in northern China and there's all kinds of moisture and instability in the atmosphere already, and they go and seed it in and it rains like crazy, and all of a sudden they think they've got the answer to everything. It's just one of those situations that it's never going to be definitive. Um, but I do believe that the theory works, and that yes, you can create more moisture if you seed an air mass and don't allow anything else to influence it. I think you can say it works, but I don't think as you blow that air downstream into a dry air mass, how long is it going to be able to rain? And I know a lot of folks are concerned about whether or not those seeding operations are creating more serious thunderstorm activity and hail and all kinds of other things. And again, we don't have a good way to prove that. And you guys are down on the ground underneath all of this that's going on, and you have probably a much bigger suspicion as to what it does. But I think in reality, we really can't prove it yet. We're maybe some point down the road, maybe AI will be able to help us with that a little bit. But for right now, I think you shouldn't look at weather modification as being a real tool that we can change our climate. We can't do that.
So, Drew, we're getting to the top of the 90 minutes. We still have a lot of questions left to go. Do you want to continue taking questions then, or can you summarize it, or should we just tell people to come back next time you're on, or are you okay to keep going a bit?
I'm okay. I have no obligations for another half hour at least, so I'm
Okay.
okay.
Okay. So, let's see. Let's see what we want to do here. Oh, this is a big one. Yeah, and I don't know that this is probably a whole nother show, but Jackson is commenting, Drew, could you give a high level explanation as to why the Palliser Triangle is how it is? I was fortunate enough to have my great grandparents decide it would be a good place to homestead there. I feel like that's a different show, whole different show. Can you sum it up in 30 seconds?
Yeah, I can do fairly quick with that. The Palliser's Triangle is very similar to the U.S. High Plains, from Montana down to Texas. The primary reason why it does not rain in those areas is because of the mountains to the west.
Yep.
Most of the time, the air aloft and at the surface, but mostly aloft, is flowing from west to east. And when the wind blows up against the western slopes of the Rocky Mountains, the air is forced to go up the slope, right? And as it goes up, it gets into colder air and it starts to condense. So whatever moisture is in the air falls out on the west side of the Continental Divide. And once the wind blows over the other side of the mountains, you get sinking motion, right? Because the air flows over the top of the mountains and then there's lower elevations there. So the air starts to sink. Well, once again, sinking air is warmer and drier biased air. And so you've lost all your moisture going up the backside of the mountains. And when it comes down the front side, there's no moisture, or a lot less. And that's the reason why Palliser's Triangle has the problem it has, in a
Interesting. Yeah, I've
nutshell.
heard that, and I heard also there's more people in Phoenix, Arizona, Phoenix proper than huge swaths of land like Montana and North Dakota, and that's why, because you don't have the rains. But do you feel, Drew, Jason Boat's asking that the eastern prairies like south central Manitoba could get dry enough for seeding and planting in May before we get significant moisture in June? Is there going to be enough of a dip to get her in?
Yeah, I think it's going to be close. The best advice I can give you is don't wait for ideal conditions. I do think that you will get an opportunity to dry down, but I'm a little bit concerned about this pattern that's underway in the U.S. right now, because it's been so stubborn with all the moisture that's occurring. And when we start shifting that jet stream northwest, it is going to be a relatively small amount of time before it starts raining in Manitoba. But we should have, as we showed in the next 2 or 3 weeks, there should be less precipitation and more warmth coming up. So I'm going to say yes. I think you'll get in there. Just make sure you don't wait too long. If you get to the point where you can get in there and work the fields, I would suggest going ahead and doing that. I don't necessarily see the big heavier rains until we get pretty late and into the spring, but I don't know what I'm doing. So you should not take me for my word, but probably follow the advice that just take full advantage of whatever you can while you can. But it will turn wetter. And
That's good advice. That's good
yeah.
advice. What Jason Dearborn's asking, what metadata services exist correlating weather with futures? Do you have a direct API for your data, which would go right into AI? Bot would be wonderful.
Yeah, I don't have anything that you can use on a daily basis. It's more based on our experience with the market. We've been doing this since 1979, and we know how let me back up. In the olden days, when weather was more fundamentally traded in the marketplace, we knew how the market would react to this kind of weather or that kind. But now we're doing more of a momentum trade in the marketplace, so it has less of an influence. But I will show you something here that would be worth your while. Let me go to corn. This is corn futures prices in association with the solar cycle. And
Mm.
this is very real and very helpful. It's complicated here. You're looking at futures prices from 1973 through early February of this year. And overlaid on that, I have shown the solar maximums, which are in red, and the solar minimums, which are in blue. And what I want you to notice is when are the futures prices most volatile and most upward moving? And the answer is after the solar minimum and about halfway to the solar maximum. So if we take a look at the 1990s here, the solar minimum was I believe around 1994, I think it was. We had this run up in prices that occurred about halfway to the solar maximum, and then we had this fall off occur. You see the same thing took place in the 2000s. It was a little bit broader base, a little bit longer lasting, but anyway, much more volatile during that period of time. And you can see it occurred also in 2020 through 2023. Now, why did that happen? And the answer is that when you go into the solar minimum, we kind of talked about this a little while ago, between the solar minimum and the solar maximum, there's a tendency for a La Nina event to occur, and it's often a multi-year La Nina. And what you need to know is that La Nina takes moisture out of the mid-latitudes. So US, Canada, Europe, Asia, even South America and Australia, the moisture is removed. The longer a La Nina prevails, the more moisture is taken out, and the higher the probability is that drought evolves. And in this last solar cycle from 2020, the solar minimum was in 2020, and 3 years later in 2023, we went through this period of crazy, prolonged La Nina. and it dried out every place in the world that grows crops, and we saw the market prices go up because of that.
Mhm.
And we know that multi-year La Ninas tend to occur more often than not during that period from the solar minimum to about halfway to the solar maximum. So that's the time period that weather fundamentally will probably have a higher potential to move markets in a more prolonged upward movement. Now, similarly, when you get to the solar maximum and you move towards the solar minimum, it's a different story. You get into these, what I call doldrum periods, which is kind of where we are now, where you end up with sideways trading over multiple years. And that tends to occur after you've reached the solar maximum, which guess what was in 2024, and before you get to the solar minimum. The solar minimum is coming up in 2030, I believe. And so, you can still make money, but if you're looking for those big long haul upward movements in prices, they don't usually occur from a weather perspective only unless you're in that solar minimum to solar maximum time period. That doesn't take into consideration wars or, all this other nonsense that goes on. But that works for corn. It works for soybeans. Same thing for soybeans. And unfortunately, we haven't been trading canola for that long, but I did apply the same principle to canola prices for this last period, and it fits very well as well. So that's probably the best I can do. But as far as a daily trade issue, if you're looking for a correlation with the weather and how it influences the marketplace, you probably want to give us a call, and we would show you what we can do every day. We write a daily column that it talks basically about how the weather is going to move the markets one way or the other. It's only from a weather perspective. We don't do technical charting or any of this other stuff based on other fundamentals, but
Yeah.
we can help out that way.
Hopefully the technical guys are using that. Very quickly, Drew, yes or no, are you following weather patterns into blockchain prediction markets?
Uh, to some degree. That's not our forte. So we do recognize it. We know basically what that's all about, but as far as doing much with it, we don't.
Clayton Kolak is saying, great stuff, guys. I like the in-depth details, the cycles in particular. I think we could do a whole nother show just on the cycles, not even the forecasts. Gilles LeBlanc is saying, a couple years back, Drew said the biggest change in the weather would be more windy conditions. Has this changed? Seems wind is always higher now. Is that just perception?
It's actually true to a certain degree. These past few years, it's become very windy, but guess what? That's also associated with the solar minimum
Mhm.
because of all the dryness that we've had in North America. The reason why the wind blows so greatly, especially in dry years, is because when you take such a large amount of real estate and you dry it out, again, talking about from Mexico to the Arctic, all that dry air will heat up and cool off faster than air that is more moist. Okay, it's just a function of physics of the air. So the more moisture you have in the air, the slower the temperatures will change. But if it's dry air, you'll go from very warm to very cold very quickly. Well, if you've got a broad area of hot weather that's occurring from Mexico to the Arctic, all of that ground in there that's dry is going to have it's going to heat up really quick, and the air is going to rise very quickly. And the faster the air rises, the more of a void it leaves at the surface, right? Because the air is moving up. So the air from outside of that upward moving air column has to come rushing in, and it comes in, and it's going to end up forcing the air, the wind to increase in speed and to fill that void. So in years that you're super dry, you tend to have a lot more wind. And you don't have to be in the dry area to experience the wind, but somebody out there needs to be notably dry. And that's been one of the issues. As we go back into a wetter cycle in the next couple of years, I think you'll see that the winds are a little bit less incredible, except when you get a strong storm to come around.
Joanne Ralph Eckstein is asking, do any of the data sets for weather integrate forest fire events? Is there, for example, is there impact of smoke on the ridges you have explained in relation to N, prairies, temperature, and precipitation?
That smoke has saved us, I think, a couple of times out of these past few years. It's a terrible thing to have to deal with, to have those fires, and it's sad. But in reality, from an agricultural perspective, those temperatures did help a lot of the prairie from seeing much more extreme conditions and bigger losses in production when it was so hot and dry in general. So in answer to the first part of that question is that we usually have a pretty good idea who's going to be dry during the summer, and we can put a higher potential for fires to develop in those particular areas. But as far as being able to quantify, who's going to get the smoke and all that, it's kind of more of a short-term range forecast. You can't really predict that far in advance as to where those fires are because they're really random. But in these last couple of years, my gosh, we've had so many of them around. It has had an influence. And now it would not change the climate, but it would change short-term weather, at least temperatures. I don't think it would have much of an influence on precipitation.
Climate change per se would be another interesting show, I think. But Edgar Hammermeister's asking, sorry, what factors are different this year relative to 1972? I don't know how much you want to go into that with a limited time there, Drew, but
Yeah, the biggest difference with 1972 and this year is really, I think, where we are relative to the solar cycle. But they are very similar years. Really are. And there is a lot of similarity there. I think the 72 was 4 years after the maximum instead of 2 years after the maximum on the sunspot cycle. 1972 was in the same place in the 18-year cycle that we are now. So there's a lot of similarities there. But one of the reasons why I don't like 1972 to a large degree is the fact that we are going into a significant El Nino. Now, we went into an El Nino in 1972 as well, but this El Nino is going to be a little bit more aggressive. And we have a lot more warm water off the west coast of North America. And I think the two combined will help us to get a little bit more moisture to occur. And I think that being on this side of the solar cycle will help us, even though in 1972 we were in the same position. I just think that where we are in the atmosphere at the moment is a little bit more conducive of getting a little bit more rain than what we saw in that particular year. When you make comparisons to these years, and you talk about the 18-year cycle and these other El Nino years, even though we talk like they're all the same, the reality is I've taken a number of years and averaged them together. And so you can't see the volatility, the variation in the precipitation distribution from one year to another or from one part of the prairies to another. And so to some degree, you're not seeing what I'm seeing. And so when I'm looking at the maps and doing the loops in the maps, I'm seeing a little less of the dry bias that occurred in 1972 in what we've had so far this year, which makes me want to lean towards a little less dryness in in this year than in 1972. So it really comes down to that. And, part of long range forecasting isn't necessarily factual. It is to a certain degree an art. And if I've miscalculated the mixing of these patterns, then I guarantee you the weather is going to be totally different than what I've described. So there's nothing set in stone here that I know what I'm talking about. But that's the way that I lean, given the years of experience.
but are bell bottoms coming back? This is everybody wants to know.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, we'll just say people are all independent, right?
They can wear what they like.
That's right.
That's their
That's right.
constitutional protection to do so.
There you go.
Nathan Coppert is asking a money question. I like this one. Are there any areas in the world that are experiencing weather anomalies that would be big market drivers in the near term?
The answer to that is yes, later in the year. And these are tropical crops. So El Nino, if it's going to be a significant El Nino, as it looks like it may be, then we're going to see influences on Southeast Asia, India. Well, let's just do it this way: from Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines through Vietnam, Thailand, into India. That whole region there will eventually become dry biased area, and there'll be a lot of concern about production from those areas. That would include rice and coffee and cocoa and sugarcane, those crops more so than the grains and oil seeds that we traditionally trade. Now, palm oil would be included in that, so there would be some influence on canola eventually. But these are things that will occur in the, we'll say, uh, maybe late third quarter and especially fourth quarter of 26 and then into 27. And remember that a lot of these crops, the coffee, the cocoa, the oil palm, the rubber, those are all tree crops. And so you have to have dryness for a longer period of time than you do for row crops to induce, some kind of a serious threat to production. But this El Nino will be significant enough and should be long lasting enough to create some issues for those areas and those crops. And that would include West Central Africa's coffee and cocoa areas as well. So
Vicky Dutton was asking about India and the impact on pulse markets. That's relevant.
yes, and in the case of India, it's a little bit about the timing of El Nino's arrival. Now, traditionally, the monsoon in India begins June 1 in the south and works its way northward by July 15th. And it rains then until we get to the second week in September, and then it goes back the other way. It starts going back to the south. Now, what I think will happen here is since El Nino is going to be in a big hurry to develop, there's going to be a bigger lag between when El Nino is declared and when the atmosphere actually responds to it. And so we may get to a La, or did I say La Nina? Sorry. We may get to an El Nino uh, on June 1st, but you're not going to see the influence in India on June 1st. You'll probably see it delayed. So I'm thinking that in India, they're going to have a good start to their monsoon in the month of June, maybe even a little bit early in late May. But when you get to August and September, it'll be a lot drier. And so the crops will finish drier. And that will create a little bit more of a market interest. But a lot depends on the timing of El Nino, its intensity, and something else that we need to talk about, and that's called the Indian Ocean Dipole, which has to do with ocean temperatures in the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. And when you're in the positive phase of Indian Ocean Dipole, which we will be in this year, that means the ocean temperatures in the Arabian Sea and Western Indian Ocean are warmer than normal, while the temperatures in off Sumatra, Indonesia, and Northwest Australia are colder than usual. When you have that kind of divergence showing up, the end result is usually an additive factor to rainfall in India. So you can have an El Nino that's downplaying precipitation in India, but if you have the positive phase of Indian Ocean dipole playing out at the same time, you don't usually get the same level of dryness. And so we're looking for a good start to India, a drier finish, but not necessarily a critically dry year. And we won't know more about that until we see exactly when El Nino kicks in and how significant it'll be. Same thing with Indian Ocean dipole. There's still a jury out on that one, I guess, is the bottom line. But that should be the trend.
One more question. We're at the finish line here, my friend. You've done tremendous today. Thanks for sharing your information. Jason Castleman says, curious about the effect on the weather from moving irrigation water to the drier areas. Does that have an impact or not really?
Shouldn't have a very big impact
Um,
because it's usually a fairly small region and a small amount of moisture that we're talking about. The Earth's atmosphere is tremendous, and we may think that we're big, but we're really
right.
not as big as we think we are. And that's really the best way to finish this out. So
We are
really,
minuscule. Go ahead, Jason. You're good. Move the water.
yeah.
We got our blessing, but there's a lot of folks on here that expressed their gratitude and said thank you. Terry Younger, Jason Boat, Eric Vandalake, Edgar Hammermeister, Darcy Friesen, Michael Carter appreciates your time. Calvin Gavilan says thank you for all the insight, Drew. You've offered hope. Wow,
Wow.
you've offered hope to a lot of farmers and ranchers that this long dry nightmare may be coming to an end. So
Yes. Praise
Darren
the Lord.
Solly
Hope
says
that's
thank
right.
you. And Walter
Yeah.
says thank you. And no, it's all good. Darren, final words, anything? What's your big takeaway from our session today?
Well, I feel pretty good about our area. Looks like we're going to get a little precipitation tonight, maybe tomorrow. Things dry off a bit for seeding operations, and then the rain can come in June just as soon as we finish spraying weeds. Fantastic.
You're loving it, lining
It
up.
looks good. Looks good on paper, doesn't it, guys? Well,
Plus,
see
there's
what
going to
we
be
Yeah,
a
got.
bump
sure
in the
does.
market.
Yeah, there you go.
I love that part. I like that. So, yeah. Well, thanks to everybody for coming on today. Thanks so much for Crop Aid Nutrition for bringing this information to the market. And man, the response was crazy. Drew, were you expecting that kind of response? So we had 420 people sign up and
That's awesome.
250 on the call today.
That's awesome.
Hungry for the weather. So, and
Yeah,
you've
you
got a
guys.
tremendous passion for it.
Yeah, and everyone that's out there, you guys bust your cans every year. You got to know you're appreciated. It's the whole reason why I do this for you guys, because you are not recognized for what you do, unfortunately, and you're so important. And I just want to thank you for what you guys do, and wish you well. And please pick up the phone and call us if you need help. We're certainly going to be able to give you some more advice if you need it.
Well, it's great to know you're not alone in the weather, and folks can talk to the best of the people that don't know anything about the weather with talking to Drew. I think you've earned that. I don't imagine anybody could be better than what you share with it today. So I really appreciate it. Thanks, Drew,
Well, thanks for having me.
and thanks, Darren, and thanks everybody that came on the call. Really appreciate it. Good luck out there. And I think Drew's advice was the best. Just get her in. Don't wait for Mother Nature. You just got to get her in. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone.
Thanks, Darren. Bye for now.